Hello and welcome to this special event with Yousif Qasmiyeh as part of Well Versed, a collaborative program led by Open Book and Stanza International Poetry Festival. I am Catherine Coromillis and I'm a lead reader with Open Book. We run 3 sessions each month focused on the same featured poet, all on Wednesday lunchtimes. The first session, which was last week, is a chance to read and discuss some of the poet's work, guided by one of Open Book's lead readers. The second session, which is today, right now, invites the featured poet to read and discuss their poetry with us, as well as provide a chance for all of you to ask questions. And the third session, which is next Wednesday, is a creative writing session where we invite participants to write in response to the work that you'll hear today. And I am just quickly going to pop a link in the chat for you if you'd like to sign up for that session next week if you haven't already signed up. So that's it in the chat for you. Please note that the session is being recorded via Zoom so that Stanza can share it more widely with their audience. So if at the end of the session you'll be asking a question on the microphone and you don't want to be heard or seen on the recording, then just switch your camera off. Now, the session's going to last for an hour and it's structured loosely along these lines. So this is the introduction session. We're then going to invite Yousif to read a selection of poems. Yousif and I will then do a bit of a Q&A together, and then I'll open it up to you all so that you can also ask your questions. So let me start with an introduction. Let's introduce our poet for today. Born and educated in Badawi refugee camp in Lebanon, Yousif Qasmiyeh. Hey, Yousif, and welcome.
Thank
Yousif is a poet and translator, everyone, who completed his doctorate in English literature at the University of Oxford. Time, the body, and ruination inform his poetry and prose, which have appeared in Poetry, Modern Poetry in Translation, Critical Quarterly, Cambridge Literary Review, PN Review, Stand, New England Review, Poetry London, and Wasafiri. Yousif is the Creative Encounters editor of the Migration and Society Journal, a writer in residence for the Refugee Hosts Project, and a Poetry Book Society selector. His debut collection, Writing the Camp, which was published by Broken Sleep Books in 2021, was a 2021 PBS recommendation, was selected as one of the best poetry books of 2021 by The Telegraph and the Irish Times, was highly commended by the 2021 Forward Prizes for Poetry, and was shortlisted for the 2022 Royal Society of Literature Ondaatje Prize. Yousif's latest book is Eating the Archive, again published by Broken Sleep Books 2023. Actually, there is one more book since then, 2024, The Southern Eye, Co-Scene Displacements, which is a collaborative work between Yousif the poet, a scholar, and a photographer. And that is a volume which is a beautiful experiment in poetic pictorial juxtaposition. I'm going to pop those 3 books in the chat for you in case you're curious about exploring them more. And before I hand over the microphone to Yousif, I just want to read some fragments from some of the praise that Yousif has received for his poetry. For example, this, and I think it'll give you an idea of who we're going to be talking with and hearing from today. So James Byrne wrote about Yousif's Eating the Archive. This vast and beautifully parablesque, love that word, second collection by Qasmiyeh is a poetics of rupture, of cracks and fissures. Qasmiyeh is one of the most exciting new writers of the 21st century. Another bit of praise. The field some have begun to call the literature of displacement is where the world's most important writing is taking place. And Qasmiyeh's second collection confirms that he is one of its brightest rising talents. And finally, here's another bit of praise. This was for Writing the Camp. Yousif's Writing the Camp is a book with which every reader needs to be in dialogue, carrying it in their heart or on their back as a perpetual interlocutor. This is a book to love. So This is the poet that we have with us today, Yousif Qasmiyeh. It's so lovely to get the opportunity to be with you, to hear you read some of your poems, and to have a chat. So, on that note, feel free to take the microphone and to read your selection of poems. But also, if you want to add any other biographical info that I might have missed, any commentary, it's all yours. So, everyone, I'm handing the mic over to Yousif, and yeah, I invite you to sit back and enjoy. Over to you, Yousif.
Okay, thank you.
And sorry, Yousif, just one more thing. If anyone's in the chat, could you all please just mute your microphones because there's a tiny bit of that noise that you get when, yeah, thanks so much, Philippa and others. All right, over to you, Yousif.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for your incredibly generous and gracious introduction. And it's a huge honor to be in your presence all. And given that you've, of course, mentioned the titles of my books, I'm going to start with the middle one, with the second volume, Eating the Archive. And I'm going to start with a poem that touches on death in the refugee camps where I was born, raised, and educated. And it's mainly, or it revolves around, in fact, my father's death um, in Badawi camp. The body, I hold it in my right, the blameless revelation beneath the skin, the notebook he once scribbled in the past poems for a torn time. Page after page, the sign that was his rhymes, incomplete, amassed for the ill heart. I remember him pouring water on us to grow like distant trees, the glasses fogging up until there was no sigh, the scrubbed bodies cast aside, and the ones waiting in the background. Until came the time, men and women in separate lines, muttering words, the sons in the yard, washing the dead father. I'll go back to in fact the very first poem in this collection, in Eating the Archive. And there are a couple of acronyms. Of course, we're familiar with the UN, the United Nations, but also UNRWA, the United Nations for Relief and Works Agency, that caters for Palestinian refugees in the camps. And of course, we're talking about refugees who have been refugees since 1948. And my home camp, or this particular area, became a refugee camp in the 50s. So I mainly talk about time and what it means, and how time also senses our arrival and departure. Time is a swelling. The past, out of all times, is what can be seen in eyes long gone. To see the past as a happening in its shade, my mother would carefully sift our UN gifted grains, the dry for us and the hovering bits for birds that never were. What we ate was what she planted in secret under her pillow, remains of nothing in the shape of distant prayers. I was not alone. My mother, with a cane and poor eyesight, was to my right, nothing to our left. Now I hold her by the hand like a drifting sound, heart to heart, throat to throat, to walk together. Bodies hung in thin air, the sweat of old age and time, suspended returns to the eyes that once saw. You say to the clock hung adjacent to all religious things in the room, my time is a swelling, my mother's yeast, for the aged bread left aside as a proof for time. When the sky is just a crow, with air raids as infinite as their ruins, the body's task is to ponder its body. Here, in this place, people ascend to normality on crutches. A body alone feasts on the body. I shall imagine my tongue drowning in languages that are not mine, so as to speak in water, to pretend not to see what is amassing in your hands, while you carry a heart barely attached to your body, to pretend all is well for once, while they prod you in the back to remind you that it is time to look. I ask a question for me, what it is in writing that has no such thing as a present, but is written, solely written for a future subject to many pasts. They would normally write their names in a graphite, so they would rub them out and write them again as names or suspected names. I begged her to take me with her. Then I could see what she could do to her eyes in wakes, tears in the aftermath of tears, her veil slowly unraveling, two loose ends harassing my grandmother's dead face. In poetry, the wound is continuously postponed. I, I've moved from the father to the mother, and I'll read a poem dedicated to my sister, who's also a poet. And perhaps some of you would know that um, the word for poetry, or the words for poetry and hair, as in our hair, in fact, they are exactly the same in the Arabic language without what we call the diacritics, without the short vowels. And these short vowels are normally extras. So these two words are identical. And this poem grapples with, in fact, poetry and 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 my sister's hair, the hair. My sister, I shall write the stitch on your veil, yours before mine, a pact between us, a text we hide in hair and poetry, in multiply darned letters, free of diacritics, like our shared quilt. And in fact, we used to, whether in our house, in the camp, or in the bomb shelters, we spent many months in these bomb shelters. We would, of course, share blankets. Um, and very, um, I'll in fact read it from writing the camp. I'll I write. I've written this poem um, when, in fact, I came to the UK as a refugee, and I'm sure that you know that fingerprinting is part of the asylum process. The asylum seeker, the refugee, would of course give their fingerprints, and this is how they validate who they are, but also how they monitor them. And and also for me, this is something that perhaps it questions even the notion of intimacy in the language and what it means to touch, what it means to be touched. Fingerprinting. She did to me what a friend would normally do for a friend, or a lover for another lover. She held my hand very tightly. When I looked at her, my fingers were above the scanner. My flesh was scanned, and so was the air around us. I thought of looking her in the eye again, pretending that we were in love. And in that room where asylum seekers and suspects gather, it was our opportunity to embrace one another while the machine was doing its job. I gave my fingerprints and left. Every time I think of that moment, I feel the need to go back to that terminal and ask her what it meant to touch a stranger. Also, I'll read from writing the camp, and I read from a sequence titled "The Camp is the Reject," and it it's about again the camp, what it means for us to relate to these places that is not supposed to last forever, that is not supposed to outlive us. But we have to remember that we're talking about 7 decades. So these camps have become their own places, their own times. Once I asked my mother, Mother, in the absence of a place, who invites who? She looked at me and said with a concerned tone of voice, My son has gone mad. Hurry, hurry up, summon the Imam to recite over him. It is the tremor in the hand that invites. My grandmother in Nahr al-Barid camp used to squeeze our little hands whenever we appeared at her doorstep and say, How did you leave the camp? We never answered. In intention, the prevalent tense is the past. We never listened to my mother and always insisted on swallowing the chewing gum, thinking that it might one day become a balloon that would transfer us to God. Is the memory of the camp not the camp? Suddenly, our senile neighbor stuffed her memories in a plastic bag and left. In the bomb shelter in Badawi camp in complete darkness, my mother, to ensure we were by her side, would count us, not knowing that most of the time the children she was tapping and uttering the number of belonged to other families. The man whose sister is also my sister once asked me, Who is older, God or the camp? The camp has its own sky when people shoot in the air in happiness and in despair. It is to kill the bird that is never there. My father, who has persisted in writing since a young age, has not published a single thing. In his beige room, with eyes trying to see, he showed me one of the magazines with a poem of his that bore somebody else's name. We look at it to see what it is that is not ill. And Catherine, am I doing okay? Can I read another one?
I would love you to.
Thank you. Um, and um, I'm going to also read from a sequence, What Remains of the Camp When the Name Dies. Because these camps are named, in fact, after certain neighborhoods, which officially and legally speaking, in fact, they do not belong to the refugee camp itself. So the refugee camp becomes its own place. In the blink of the eye, it's a fleeting fluttering, the afternoon eyelid in its ghostly sleep. In bed, a mass of flesh, intervals of moans, hair still veiled and still hair, escaping grayness and air, hands by her side, sulking like sullen widows, tablets for heart conditions, and life seeping through the seam, wrinkled memories tucked away, some water in a plastic jug for the odd cough and the house plant, a small window with the creaking hinges in the far end leading to life. I returned to see her guarding the threshold and the door, hesitant eyes as quivering as the electrical cables in the camp. What we see in the camp will never be completely seen. My brother once saw the gravedigger sobbing over the broken handle of his shovel. They burn reeds with reeds and turn the sound to incense and incense to sound. And when the fire wanes on the slope, they rummage in the ash in search of sound. Blindness is a guest, leave it in your place and depart. When he slapped me because I stole water from the spring, he forgot that my tears are for me alone. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, that was lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Kat.
Thanks everyone for your emojis and love in the chat. I think we'll have a Yusuf, I might ask you to read a couple more depending on how we go. But
And I'll be happy to do so.
yes, good. It's lovely hearing you. Um, oh, there's so much, but I think I might just start with with two sort of more generally type questions. And then I really want to dive into some of the rich images and how you construct some of those poems and my reaction to a couple of them. But just firstly, just really quickly, you're a poet invited here to read. How do you choose the poems, to read to us today? Do they represent something? Are you wanting to express something about you and them to us in this moment?
I think that really this is a question that tends to be overlooked, as you know, Catherine, when it comes to reading poetry. I think that we think a lot about the process, but we don't just think about um, about the event itself. We think about maybe the relevance, the meaning, but also the history of what we're trying to choose. And for me, the ones that I have read, perhaps out of loyalty to my family in the refugee camps, um, I can't but insist on reading some of these poems that in a sense summon them over and make them also writers and the speakers uh, with me. I've written um, a poem uh, about co-seeing with my mother. My mother is illiterate, and when I tell her that I've written something about her or for her, her response um, in our spoken Arabic is simply that I hope that it's a good poem.
Yeah.
And of course, we worry about the written. We worry about the written as an archive, as something that is going to be read by different people, and it's going to also bear its own afterlife.
Yeah.
And these are things that I tend uh, to maybe to think about a lot. And 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 time for me isn't just the chronology that marks the emergence of the poem itself, but also what's behind and what's in front, in fact, of the poem, especially when poems are, I would say, extracted from that environment.
Mm.
That um, not just the ordinary, because the ordinary is what we all, in fact, to think about daily. I don't think that we tend to think about extraordinary things, but it is this ordinariness that I try to capture, and I try to capture as it is. I do not think that I need to add anything to it. So perhaps it's the writing that imposes itself, and how things are ordered, and how things are felt and sensed. And
Yeah.
I hope that I've answered your question,
Yeah.
Catherine.
Well, I think that's the thing with questions and answers. It could go, it sort of expands beyond the question itself. The question is kind of a hint of where we think we're going, and then it sort of unfolds as we talk. Um, so thank you for bringing your family into this space today. And I think that you mentioned your father writing, but not publishing. So what does that mean for you and your father, legacy? There's a kind of a forward direction. I think you mentioned also that um, something about poetry postponing. So there's a future orientation.
Yeah,
So are you linked to your father's writing, like you're taking the legacy forward? I don't know. Tell us a bit more about that because that's lovely.
yeah. I think that I personally I worry about the word legacy.
Right.
So I feel that it's somewhat enormous,
Right.
and um, and it tends to become a burden,
Yeah.
especially when we
Yeah. I
think.
feel as soon as I said that, I think the room just went
No, no, it's just,
heavier.
but I totally understand um, your very important point, Catherine. I think we not to write for him, but to write as a supplement, in a sense,
Yeah.
for his writing.
Yeah.
And here, in fact, the word supplement as well is very complex in the English language, because it can also devour the origin. And
Right.
it's not
Right.
just an extension of the superfluous or the extra. In fact, philosophically, it can. And this is something that, in fact, Jacques Derrida wrote about extensively on this notion of the supplement. So the supplement can take over from the origin. My job is not to take over. My job is simply to how to, it's like taking um, some medication in order to sort of uh, to mainly um, say that I'm going to live for an extra day or maybe an extra week or some
Wow.
how. But for my father, he was very sadly, he became very, I would say, bitter about not being able to publish because, as you know, that there is nepotism in this publishing world, and and I'm talking about somebody from within the refugee camp writing poetry. But what we've done, we've in fact kept his notebooks and also his individual drafts. And my sister, who's based in Sweden now, has them, and who's also a poet. So she insisted on having these, and she's kept them. And I only recently I've noticed how my messy handwriting in Arabic, in fact, somewhat in fact represents his, because his was very fast. Mine is very slow, but it is as messy as my father's. So these are also back to fingerprinting, what we leave, the trace, and what you see in the father or the mother's face. And I think that I've started to realize how similar we are. As I get older, I can see him in my face, and these are beautiful and yet sad things,
Yeah.
because these are the third memories. So all of a sudden, we've started to remember who we are, or the resemblance between myself and the father. And you've mentioned poetry and how poetry defers the wound and defers pain. And this deferral is not, um, in fact, to overlook the pain or to overlook the wound. On the contrary, it brings some kind of consciousness and active engagement with the wound, because it's your decision to defer, and it's also your decision to engage with something in situ. And that's why to defer is also to be somewhat an independent refugee within the camp itself. I don't know how this might be, but at least in writing, you can talk about the camp without it dwelling on suffering.
Right.
And I think that there is really a lot of writing happening in these refugee camps. And of course, they vary, um, but also uh, to speak about life, not just within the camp, but also on the outskirts of the camp and beyond the refugee camp, I think is something that maybe enables the poetry we're trying to write to be more humane
Yeah.
and somewhat more. It's um, it's more humane, and yet, of course, it comes from the specific in us.
Yeah. I really felt that, especially in fingerprinting. I had such a strong reaction to the image of this person at the Home Office holding your hand while fingerprinting, while taking your fingerprints. And I'm just thinking that some of the ex I mean, for some of us, the experience of being a refugee, etc., is very kind of a distant type of thing. We don't have that immediate experience of it. We might read about it in the news or read reportage. So there's a certain type of language that represents that experience that keeps us distant from it.
Yeah.
But this poem where you talk about um, this person holding your hand so you can get fingerprinted. I've had the experience of someone holding my hand. I've held someone's hand, be it a lover or my mother or I started thinking about my grandfather and him holding my hand as a 5-year-old as I was reading your poem. So you almost held my hand and brought me into your poem through that experience. So we know that poetry does that. Um, so so many questions about this poem. Firstly, at the end, you say that every time you think of that moment, you want to go back to that terminal and ask that lady what it feels like, what it meant to touch you.
Yeah,
So meaning around that, and I think that's the humanity. I feel that in that position, you were looking at her, looking for meaning, imagining that you might be lovers to kind of make a meaningful moment. So you
yeah,
were seeing this person as a human, but I don't know if you were seen in that way. So there's a lot there. So about the human experience that you mentioned, that poetry maybe can communicate.
yeah,
Do you have anything just to say about that?
yeah. I think that you are right, Catherine, um, about maybe the last lines in the poem, um, not necessarily a questioning, but perhaps proposing um, an entry point
Yeah,
and what it means to be touched and how the touched becomes the toucher. I mean, the moment we're touched, we also touch. Whether willingly or unwillingly, this is another matter. But we are part of this touch. And but also this poem is informed, in fact, by how I understand touching in the Arabic language. In fact, in the Arabic language, the word has a three levels. And there is the word that is captured in, um, for instance, when we talk about Virgin Mary and to give birth without being touched. This
yeah,
is one. And but we have also the touch that goes through us, that happens physically, palpably, corporeally. We're being touched. We know exactly. But there is the third, which is spectral. So it's like touching, hovering over us. And we can add even a fourth, which has to do with the reflexive, how we respond to us being touched. So yes, the poem itself also fingerprinting. I wanted the progressive, this ing, the gerund, the verbal noun,
mm,
to also carry some continuity. So it is a conversation, it's a dialogue. Whether the immigration officer accepts this dialogue or not, I do not know. I'm sure that they are going to say no to it. But how on earth can you just simply, without um, asking for consent, how can you drag a hand
yeah,
and just you press it against the scanner? And in fact, I have a broken, when I was a child, I broke one of my fingers very badly and it's torn. And I kept saying to this lady, please don't press too hard because it was really painful. And yet, of course, the logic behind the pressing is to make sure that the fingerprint is complete.
yeah,
So whether the body is incomplete or not, it doesn't matter. Whether the
yeah,
body is injured or not, it doesn't matter. What they want to ensure that they've got something that is within that, of course, political system is validated or perceived as a true resemblance of us.
yeah.
And yet it is a conversation. Sadly, of course, it happens only in writing, but it is.
Well, you know what, Yusuf, I had this random thought today. Imagine if your poem, this one, or maybe some others, it became kind of a training manual for the Home
I,
Office people to kind of learn about, I don't know if it's empathy or just seeing, paying attention to the humanity in this very administrative, bureaucratic task of fingerprinting. Um, yeah, it would be a wonderful addition to any training manual, I would say.
At least perhaps to be read, or to
To be
be,
read.
yeah, to be read, um, to be read in that context,
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
for them to be invited also um, to our space, where we're being dragged from one room to another, from one detention center to another. Um, so uh, I was born into refugeeness in Badawi camp as a Palestinian refugee. My parents, my grandparents were refugees. So I became a refugee since birth. And then when I came to the UK, I had to request refugeeness. I
Yeah.
had to ask for it. So see how this complex way of looking at what is legal and what's illegal about our presence as human beings, and how um, so in a sense you have to sort of to relinquish your presence in order to achieve something that resembles a passport. And this is exactly what I went through. But I also hope that I didn't, or my intention wasn't to talk about suffering. Empathy is very important, but I do
Yeah.
not want it to overshadow the poetic within the writing. And
What do you mean exactly? Do you mean technically?
technically, but also I'm talking about lyricism here. I'm talking
Right.
about the way a poem also sees light, the way a poem is written, uh, how we conceive of poetry, how complex also human conditions are. I'm not trying to say, look and read it and benefit from it. I'm trying to say, you know what? Our emotions as people who are being touched and as people who are touching meet somewhere. They overlap.
Yeah.
And this defines the human, because it is a common ground. But also the common ground is the poetic and the written. This is my sort of reference. Take it and read it. And
Yousif, because next week some of us will be writing in response to your poems, how do you make that leap from the specific sort of traumatic event into the poetic so that is that where does the conversation begin once the poem becomes the poetic and is shared and
I assume so, but also I have to say I haven't thought about it
right.
in such a clear, perhaps paradigms, or sort of categories, or spaces.
Mm,
I feel that also a good, I'm not saying that it's a good poem, but something that is worthy of being called poetry, I think it tells you that.
right.
And it stays with you.
Mm,
And you would like to read it again. And
mm,
this again is also a kind of deferral, because you are not abandoning the written, you're returning to it. And I just hope that, because it's not about making people feel, um, it's not about pitying us. No, no, no. I mean, we have good and really bad sort of moments, and people can be bad and can be also good, and
yeah.
this is how, and we're we're different the way also people out there are different, and it's about accepting our difference
Oh,
as different.
oh, thanks ever so much. Yeah,
Sorry, Yousif, I'm just going to
yeah.
ask
Thanks a
the
lot. Yes.
moderator, maybe Natalie, you can
Bye.
put Margaret on. Oh, thanks, Margaret, and thanks, Natalie. Sorry about that, Yousif.
That's absolutely fine.
Everyone in the, I'm going to ask Yusuf maybe one more question, but start thinking about whether you have any questions. You can pop them in the chat with the word question at the beginning, but I'll also invite you to the microphone if you'd like to prefer to speak your question. So let me just ask Yusuf, do you by any chance have contamination near you to read?
Yes, yes. In fact, I was meant to start with it,
Oh, were you?
but
Okay.
I missed this what I marked. I marked, and then I felt a bit. So I felt that maybe I should return to my father first. But yes, I'm happy to read contamination. And um, but here, contamination as a word is really, in fact, it's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think that this is how a difference is engendered, and
And everyone, you might want to just close your eyes and just really listen to some of the words because I'd be curious for everyone's responses. But Yusuf, yeah, over to you.
contamination. They told me that my dialect is not as pure as it should be. According to them, I have failed to preserve what I have inherited. But in truth, I have inherited nothing. I just heard noises, and without even knowing how or why, I accumulated some in my pockets and ran away. I robbed them in daylight. They tried to catch me, but before laying their pure noises on me, I swallowed what became mine quickly. As I walk on my own, I think of what I swallowed that day. I smile without letting my dialect know that I still do not know what it might sound like in the singular.
Yeah, thanks for reading that, Yusuf. I found when I read that again, I'm thinking ahead to next week as we'll be writing. So the word swallowed, you say, I swallowed what became mine quickly. I think of what I swallowed that day. And in another poem, you talk about swallowing your tongue. And that just like snapped me awake as that swallowing. And I know that to swallow is something that we often do without thinking, but sometimes it's very intentional. It can be painful if you're trying to swallow a bit of food that doesn't go down, or you want to swallow so you don't say something you'll regret. So I just thought that was such a brilliant way of bringing someone into your poem, in, and into your experience, which might be different, foreign, like just not familiar. And was the word swallow intentional? I don't know. It just strikes me as such, and that's where you pulled me in.
I, I, yes, it is the simple answer. Yes, there is intentionality,
Yeah,
and we have also to remember that uh, um, to swallow also is to choose, unless of
right.
course it's forced feeding, and
Yeah,
and this and then of course it shows, for me at least, appears what is language, what is a dialect. I still remember, just to maybe to mention a couple of things about the word dialect in the refugee camps, but also in the Arab world. We have what we call Fusha, formal Arabic. It belongs to the written. But we have different dialects, and these dialects are spoken. So they are the intimate versus, of course, the formal. But also, the intimate isn't just one thing. My mother speaks a dialect. My father, my late father, spoke another because he came from a Palestinian city.
mm,
My mother, in fact, was born en route during the Exodus. So her dialect, in fact, was formed in the refugee camps as she was growing up. So her dialect was mainly a combination of the parents, but also of other girls and boys as she was growing up. And also dialects are like, I would say, the shibboleth, because it gives you access to people, to spaces, and people would. I still remember the very first time somebody asked me about my dialect was, in fact, when I sat the equivalent of what you call here GCSEs, because from the camps you have to exit the camps and to go to mainly state schools, schools that belong to the government. And given that I was educated at UN, at United Nations schools, so you have to go and do the official exams.
Mhm.
And I don't know how, but uh, perhaps I said something to the invigilator then. And straight away he asked me where I came from.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I started to think about what it means for refugees, for Palestinian refugees, to exit these camps, but also return to these camps. But also, we're questioned about what kind of language, what kind of noise, what kind of sounds, but also across, let's call it the Palestinian fabric. Palestinians speak different dialects. And this is the very perhaps base of 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 the poem of
Right.
contamination.
Yeah.
Also, contamination is a trace, because the moment you've got a contaminated dialect, this means that you've accepted other dialects, or
Yeah.
at least you've accepted that part of your actual dialect to disappear. And
Yeah.
and these are all things that, the way, for example, we have the word lingua, the way we talk about the tongue, the swallowing, these are all things that I think about when it comes to language.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Yousif.
Pleasure.
Wow. I think I need to invite some other voices to ask you some questions. So, if you have a question that you have succinctly articulated and would like to ask Yousif, just maybe put your hand up or pop it in the chat. And yeah, Maya, over to you.
I have a special request because you just spent a long time talking about dialects and your different voice. I understand a little bit of Arabic, but when you read and I hear Arabic, I can hear the beauty of it. So please, could you read even 2 lines in your own dialect so we can get the feel of it all, because it means more to me than hearing it in English.
Okay.
It
So,
sounds a weird request, but it's because you're writing about your voice and about your,
okay.
yeah,
So, I,
your choice, your choice of
in
it's just
fact, so there is an article that,
mm,
or a chapter in a book on translation. Um, um, and in this chapter, there are several poems that exist in Arabic and English. But I would like to talk about um, um, about how I translate. In fact, to this day, I write between and across languages,
mhm.
and I write with a pencil. I do not use the computer. I've got pieces of paper and um, and all these drafts, sort of piles of notes. This is how I form my things. So I can't give you something that is complete, but I
No,
can,
just a
and
few lines in Arabic
we
because
have
it
just to
sounds
remember some.
amazing.
No. We have to also remember something, that, as I said before, that the written has nothing to do with the dialect. Because
Mhm.
the written is, in fact, what we call Fusha, formal Arabic. And the dialect is just the spoken. So even when I read or recite something that I wrote between Arabic and English, it's still the formal Arabic rather than the dialectal Arabic. I hope that this makes sense.
Mhm.
So what we say, in fact, as in conversations, for instance, and this is something, and but also what I write and how this written is transformed into a poem. This is formal Arabic. Of
Mhm.
course, in English, it's different, but in Arabic, this is a very clear, let's call it partition.
Yeah,
So,
thank you.
pleasure.
I was just thanking Maya and Yousif on mute, but I'm here now. Yeah, anyone else? Would you like to ask a question? Just put your hand up or pop in the chat or just turn on your microphone and jump on in. Let's see. A bit shy today, everyone. If there are no more questions, shall we ask Yousif, because we've got 2.5 minutes left. Would you like to read a poem to send us off on our way?
I'd love to. And I would like, in fact, to read something, and please, um, this is dedicated to my dear friend, brilliant poet Anthony Vani Capildeo. And the title is Communion. And please forgive me because it has this word. And it is here. It's the lentils that we use to receive from the United Nations as part of the rations. We grow nothing, only the sky. Lentils, because of what they are, what will be of them at the Last Supper, what we call food so as to remember our bodies fleetingly, what takes time while giving time, abundant times for us to be hosted by air while straying in differing directions to distant fates. Those lentils are not sifted, they are pure and impure, split and whole. With air and dust we throw them somewhere, a chosen somewhere, a premeditated somewhere, and wait for them to grow as we grow. Lentils for the mouths that wear the ultimate gift. This is in no way an unconditional gift, or one given to us in our own hands, but to say that the hands that delivered them to us looked too big. Healthy hands, hands from Inon camp, hands that can write names, transliterated names, without hesitation, hands that can write imitations of misery with a scrupulous detail, without any fear of going hungry, without any fear of being struck off the UN register, unlike our hands. The Quran's lentils, those that feature in the holy books in our shared mouth, to steal from the bird's beak dreams, my mother, the birds that never live in the camp, but hover over us in season. The watery lentils, the inexhaustible treasures of the poor, the drowned lentils, the floating lentils in collective imaginations, the often talked about of food, the overwritten of bearings. Why lentils, Anthony? To eat textually, to eat the archive, to eat that which cannot be eaten, to eat the deluge of tears long confused with salt, to eat the exodus in us as companions, to eat the dreams that could have been truer, to eat them in the presence of a tongue blocking routes, places, and times, to eat them in order to witness the edible as a witness to us. My mother, who was too young to count, and too young for her younger siblings to be left in her care, helplessly bore witness to one of them swallowing uncooked grains and dying. The parents were plowing somebody else's fields and scattering their seeds. My mother still dreams benignly of full stomachs, in her words, full but not too full. Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone, if you want to pop on the mic, round of applause for Yousif, Qasmiyeh, or pop an emoji or reaction in the chat. Thank you so much. That was an absolute pleasure to spend this hour with you. And thank you all for being here and for your comments in the chat. And that's us. Off we go. Bye for now.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks.